This program is brought to you by Real Estimate, Australia's #1 property value estimate. Get your real estimate today on realestate.com.au.
Welcome back. There are 2,700 homes scheduled to be auctioned this week. That's up 39% when compared to the same week last year. New South Wales will hold 961 auctions, with about 800 in Sydney. Victoria will hold 1,136 auctions, with virtually all of them in Melbourne. Queensland will hold about 300 auctions, with about half of them in Brisbane. South Australia will hold 157 auctions, with most of them in Adelaide. Western Australia, Tasmania and the Northern Territory will hold 45 auctions between them, and that's much higher than usual. And the ACT will hold 88 auctions. Take a look at the most viewed properties going to auction this weekend. And in New South Wales, top property is number 220 Somerset Street, Mossman. This two-bedroom apartment needs to be completely redone. The top property in Victoria is 26 Holly Street, Preston. This four-bedder has two bathrooms, sits on almost 600 square metres. The kitchen has been redone, but other parts of the house could use a spruce up. Price guide is about $800,000. The top property in Queensland is 22 Garlingi Court, Bonnigan. This giant property has 7 bedrooms, a space for 17 cars, and sits on 30,000 square metres. It has huge living areas, a giant pool, and the grounds feel like a golf course. The top property in South Australia is 31 Valley View Drive, Highbury. This four-bedder has great views of the Adelaide foothills. It looks like it was built in the 1970s with wood-panelled walls and kitchen and laundry appliances from the same era. Asking price is about $1.4 million. And the top property in Western Australia is 8 Rowley Place, Bull Creek. This six-bedder has 4 bathrooms, large living areas and a pool. It was built in the 1970s and has been renovated since then. And the most viewed property on the REA Group website this week is 4 Everglade Court, Golden Grove, South Australia. This 5-bedder in Adelaide's northern suburbs feels like a resort. Sits on about 2,150 square metres, has massive living spaces, huge indoor and outdoor entertaining areas. There's a giant pool, a full-size tennis court, parking for 7 cars. Inside, there's a chef's kitchen, spiral staircase, gym, office, gaming room and master bedroom with a large walk-in wardrobe. The ad says it's in a secluded location adjacent to bushland, but if you zoom out on the map, you can see it's also adjacent to a Boral concrete quarry. There's no price guide for this one. And for more on property, I caught up with Eleanor Creagh from REA Group just a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the busiest weekend we've seen for auctions since before the Easter break, with auction volumes tracking around 40% higher than this same time last year. And that significant surge is most being seen in Victoria and New South Wales. But, you know, despite auction volumes being consistently higher than this same time last year, we're still seeing clearance rates steadily picking up over the last few weeks, despite those auction volumes remaining strong.
Yeah, clearance rates above 60% at the moment on average. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, clearance rates nationally sitting around the 64% mark. So we're relatively firm, and certainly relatively firm given the pickup in auction volumes that we've seen.
And this week you put out a property price report for the month of April. How did prices track across the country during the month?
Yes, so we're seeing that home price uptrend remains intact, with national home prices cycling through their 16th consecutive month of growth now, lifting a further 0.23% in April. Now that brings them up 6.6% on levels seen in April last year, although we are starting to see that pace of growth, which really started the year pretty strong, is easing off a little bit in most capital city markets at the moment. But really some extraordinary growth around the country. Perth prices up a little over 20% over the past year.
And it looks like, just looking at the chart, Melbourne down a little bit over the month and only up 1% at an annual rate. What's the struggles happening down there in Melbourne?
Yeah, so we're continuing to see that conditions in Melbourne are quite a bit softer than some of the other capital city markets. We know that growth in Melbourne has certainly lagged Sydney, Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide really over the past year, with Melbourne home prices yet to recover all of the falls that we saw in 2022 when interest rates first began rising. Now, I think a lot of it is to do with this supply-demand imbalance that just isn't quite as prevalent in Melbourne. So since about mid last year, we've seen that the total number of properties listed for sale in Melbourne has been well above decade averages. And that's provided buyers consistently with more choice, more options on market, probably more power at the negotiating table and less upward pressure on home prices.
Also looking at the stats, it looks like regional areas outpaced capital cities during that month. Any sort of reasoning why that happened?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've seen that over the past year, capital city markets have outperformed regional areas. But yeah, as you say, in April, we have seen that trend has reversed and regional areas actually outperformed the combined capital city markets throughout April. Now, of course, 1 month maybe does not a trend make, but certainly we are starting to see that some of those regional areas, growth is actually starting to re-accelerate a little bit. Could be the fact that we've got those affordability constraints really coming into play in the capital city markets after the strong growth we've seen over the past year. Mortgage servicing costs are still much higher, interest rates remain high, and some of those more affordable, commutable regional markets are where we're seeing prices are stronger so far this year.
Yeah, and interest rates are high, but they haven't moved much, well, since November last year. They've been stable. So is that kind of giving buyers a bit of confidence as well?
Yeah, I think the stability in the current interest rate environment has certainly played into or has been a driver of confidence amongst both buyers and sellers with the uplift in properties we've seen coming to market in both Sydney and Melbourne. I certainly think that that's played into it, and we know we've got that continued strength in home buying demand, really that is facing into a pretty tight supply environment. We're continuing to see a slowdown in the delivery of new builds. Building activity is around decade lows, and at the same time, housing demand is strong with population growth, tight rental markets, resilient labour market conditions with the unemployment rate low, and of course, those home equity gains of recent years are continuing to drive upgrade activity.
And look, we talk about rents every week, but how are they going right now?
Look, the rental market is incredibly challenging at the moment, and rental prices are continuing to accelerate. So across the capital cities, we're seeing that rental price growth is a little over 10% at the moment. So still some very strong growth in rental prices. Now, the silver lining is that we are seeing that pace in the growth in rental prices easing off this year, but it does still remain strong. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's significant reprieve on the horizon for renters, just given that we're not expecting any significant increase in the supply of available rentals anytime.
Yeah, so stock levels, in other words, pretty low right now for rent.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And even though we know that activity from investors has increased, it's probably not at the level where it needs to be to really meaningfully increase the pool of available long-term rentals and really significantly ease rental markets. You know, rental vacancy rates are close to record lows in most markets and sub 1% in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. So really crisis conditions in most parts of the country.
Eleanor, Creagh, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.